Carolyn Richards, and in this section I want to explore why communities are not getting the built outcomes that they want and the role that local zoning codes play in just that dynamic. Today's development patterns are the result of federal, state, and local regulations, which have incentivized single-use car-centric neighborhoods. Understanding why we have the development patterns that we have will help us identify the codes and regulations that need to change to create the types of development and the types of communities we really want. Where and how communities are designed, planned, and built are a local issue, but there are a number of federal and state policies that unintentionally create barriers to walkable urbanism. One example is our interstate system, which was designed post-World War II to better move military equipment from point A to point B. How our highways were specifically routed through cities as a way of dismantling blight and dismantling some of our city infrastructure was an intentional move. Even now, federal regulations around water infrastructure promote low-density development and create a number of barriers to higher density development. And another example of federal policy dictating local land use practices is the redlining practices implemented immediately after World War II. Returning GIs were prohibited from buying homes in existing city neighborhoods and instead forced a suburban migration. At the same time, the generous lending practices available to white veterans were not available to Black veterans. This practice, called redlining, facilitated further segregation of our cities and region, and is part of the structural racism of our city building practices that we must now dismantle. Demand for walkable urbanism remains high. In the last 20 years, surveys, consumer preference surveys from both the red and the blue side of the aisle have consistently demonstrated that approximately 50% of the population wants more walkable urbanism, while 50% wants more like low density dispersed development or more suburban type of development. Yet we're only responding with about 10% of product. In a recent EPA study, they found that in 2019, only 2.5% of the houses that were built would qualify under walkable urbanism. Even if that figure is off by an order, 4 times order of magnitude, you see that there's a wide gap between what the demand is, about 50% wanting walkable urbanism, and what the supply is. I also need to talk about public engagement, because where and how the public engages has a dramatic impact on our built and natural environment. In a good development process, residents and stakeholders are included in the design and visioning process. In a not so good process, the public is invited to provide comments when the bulk of the design and the uses have already been determined. However, in both of these cases, it's the fear of the unknown that can ultimately dominate these discussions, where the rallying cry becomes "not in my backyard." So the end result is not something that's beautiful. The end result is a series of compromises. We need to move into a more comprehensive public engagement process where local residents, the stakeholders who know their neighborhood best, are put in the driver's seat. While it's more expensive and time-consuming, a more collaborative public engagement process can lead to more support and faster development outcomes. Walkable urbanism also requires higher density development, which inevitably raises concerns around increased traffic. Where will all the cars go? Somehow we've gotten away from planning our cities for people and instead built them for cars. Our cities were traditionally built around streetcars, enabling greater mobility without always using cars. Refocusing the discussion around increased mobility instead of traffic volumes can really help move this discussion forward. And finally, zoning. Zoning was intended to protect residents because nobody wants to live next to a factory. But unfortunately, many of today's zoning codes are outdated and haven't been updated to reflect current trends or priorities. And the codes that are in place are not necessarily responsive to residents' needs and wants, given the shifting demographics and desires. So how do we create beloved places? There are a number of land use regulations that create significant barriers to walkable urbanism, and it's likely that your community faces some or all of these obstacles. Let's take a closer look. Parking requirements are generally at the top of this list. Where will all the cars be parked? How many? What about the day after Thanksgiving? Developers of retail and housing are often required to include massive parking areas because of current local regulations, which leads to incredible excess. In Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, there are 8 parking spaces for each vehicle that's registered in the county. Requiring excessive parking increases the cost of development, increases impervious cover, leading to additional stormwater runoff, and increases parking dead zones, which contributes to low-density dispersed development. Requiring on-site parking also drives up the cost of development and spreads the development out because now you've got off-site parking, as you can see in this photo. Not allowing on-street parking, either as part of your parking regulations or not allowing it at all, decreases pedestrian safety and experience as parked cars provide a buffer between sidewalk activities and passing cars. By changing parking requirements to better balance parking supply and demand, we can create more walkable, dense, and vibrant neighborhoods. Another big issue is street design standards. Many street design standards lack context of place. Suburban standards are adopted for downtowns and main streets and neighborhood centers, and rural standards are often adopted for our suburbs. Context is essential for developing street design standards that work for your community. In many examples, sidewalk activities are prohibited. Would that work for an emerging neighborhood center or transforming suburban street? Standards that require a minimum lane width, for example, encourage faster speeds, making streets more dangerous and hostile to pedestrians. Frontage standards are another big area of reform. Simple changes in the code for how buildings meet the street can make the difference in the economic success of a community. And buildings that are set back far from the street break up the pedestrian experience. Allowing blank walls creates a pedestrian dead zone. Imagine walking down the street with the wind howling. There's nothing to look at to distract you. Clearly, I'm taping this in the middle of a winter storm. Uses are another problematic area. Many zoning codes provide strict definitions of how buildings can be used, and that includes many limitations, such as not allowing manufacturing. But these limitations do not take into account the hyperlocalism trend that has emerged in the past decade. Many small and mid-sized towns now support and encourage small-scale local manufacturing, yet their zoning codes don't allow it. Also, many codes require first-floor retail everywhere instead of requiring an activated space. For example, I was working with a local government planner and she said, "We want to require first-floor retail." And I stopped her and asked, "What is the outcome that you're seeking? Is it retail or is it something else?" She was like, "We want an activated space and retail can help us get there." I said, "Zone then for an activated space." In downtown DC, there's a daycare on the corner, first floor daycare on the corner close to where I work, and it activates the space beautifully, and it's not first floor retail. Code for the outcome you want to achieve the street or neighborhood that you envision. Finally, weak standards can wreck a street. Buildings shape the public spaces of Main Street and downtowns. Everyone has had the experience of walking down a beautiful street and being jarred by a concrete block of a building that is out of place, either because it's set back too far, it's too high, or it's too low, or the scale is wrong for the street, as you can clearly see here. Minor text changes in zoning codes can match historic lot sizes, setbacks, and heights can go a long way towards ensuring that a building form is in the appropriate context. This discussion of federal, state, and local land development regulations was not intended to be comprehensive. Our land development regulations are filled with hundreds of requirements that ultimately serve to create lower density, exclusive, and dispersed development. Great walkable urban places, buildings, blocks, and neighborhoods are powerful economic and social engines, whether in small towns or in big cities. And creating these walkable streets and neighborhoods is a proven path to improving community health and resilience while promoting sustainability, business opportunities, and equity. Across the country, and certainly in Michigan, many small and mid-sized cities are looking for ways to foster greater Main Street and downtown development, redevelopment, and revitalization. Thank you for your attention and learning about what are the barriers to great urbanism and how can we get the development that we want. Thank you again.